Yeah, let's hop in.
We're jumping straight in?
Yeah, dude, let's just do it. I feel like we just need to jump into the deep end with this.
Okay.
I will say a couple things that I found really helpful as we were preparing for this. You sent out a couple of those links. I watched we did a podcast a long time ago with How to Read Revelation with you, Aaron, and Jenna.
Yes.
That was January of 2022.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's linked in the podcast description.
So that was good.
And we're going to also send that out.
Okay. And then I listened to the first two sermons that Yancey did in the Revelation series. And I thought that was just kind of a helpful tools and resources as I read and got, initially overwhelmed and confused with some of this stuff. So I would encourage other people seek out those tools because it really is helpful.
It is helpful. And I think we have a lot of resources when it comes to Revelation. There's a lot of really good ones out there. And I think they're worth sitting in for a little bit if you are really, really trying to take a dive into Revelation. It's also okay to just read through this and get the big picture of what God is promising and calling us to. That's okay too.
So when you say there's a lot of resources, you mean Clear Creek has a lot of resources, and we
do.
try and because there's some people who have some crazy theology
That's right.
about
yeah,
this.
don't just Google, or you can just Google, but you're going to get a lot of crazy.
Yeah, you need to be
And
cautious.
so we actually do at Clear Creek. So if you just go to clearcreekresources.org and you just use the search bar and put in Revelation, you're going to, or genre, or how to study the Bible, you're going to get so many resources.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
I also brought a list of other things that are helpful.
Yes.
Just as a start, because again, you said sit down and read it. You can, absolutely. This is one of those places for me where I benefit from other voices and other help learning and studying and getting my mind wrapped around it. So recently there was a podcast by Russell Moore where he had Jen Wilkin on. Did she write a book on Revelation? I think maybe she just did. Anyway, they have a brief discussion. I find that helpful. If you like listening to podcasts, the Bible Project guys did one on how to read the Bible. So it's not just how to study, but it's all the different genres, and they do have podcasts and a video about apocalyptic literature. We mentioned our Clear Creek resources, but then also just good commentaries. So G.K. Beale has a commentary that we used in that series. N.T. Wright has one, and Anthony Hoekema has another book on the Bible in the future. So all those would be
Those are really helpful.
Yeah, and like me, like the average guy, I'm probably not going to look up Beale's stuff, but
Yes,
the
his,
podcast
his
and things.
small podcast is a
but there
lot.
are people who I'm sure will want to.
Well, to that point though, even just the Bible Project video on the Book of there's two. It's 2 parts, but it's 7 minutes long. The first part, that alone will help you start. It's worth using.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it is worth just sitting in this for a second. Like we have a tendency to do one of two things, that we either overemphasize this book and we try to decode it and what's happening, and this is how we sort of view the world, and that can sometimes lead to fear, and trying to figure out what's happening in the world, or we underutilize this book. We don't care about it. We don't think it matters to us. And we have to find the balance of this might not be something that we're like seeing happen every day. We're not going to decode it for our current culture, but it's very, very relevant. So we need to read it. It's God's word to us, but we also don't want to overemphasize its influence.
So let's talk about like either how you grew up or at some point in your life, have you overemphasized it or been in a community that did, or under?
I want to hear Ted.
I feel like it was underemphasized. Like it was just this thing. In my experience, it was just this book of the Bible that existed that we didn't really talk about. I don't think it was even that relevant until 2 years ago when we walked through it as a church. And I think it did give. I think the thing that I remember, and even listening back, it jarred that again. Was if you remember, like in 2022, we had come out of just craziness with COVID and all this stuff that, is the beginning of the tensions and culture rising against, Christians and,
There's a lot of chaos.
If you're a
at
Christ
that time.
follower, it's, is kind of anti, or it wasn't as cool. And so, using the word, persecuted church very loosely,
Oh, yeah, right.
But knowing and understanding that when the cultural context with which this was written, and the amount of Christians there were, and after the season of having this letter or these letters, how it grew exponentially, that this should be hopeful. It should be maybe a tool or a resource or something that we can view in a way that should give us a hope that allows us to like multiply our efforts of making disciples. And so, I don't know. Does that?
Yeah, no, I mean,
that's good.
I'm actually surprised. I thought you were going to say overemphasized, because I think
Oh.
for a lot of
I just didn't traffic in those things in circles
Yeah.
enough where it was like, you're hellfire, brimstone, there's going to be a fire, and if your name's not in the book, you're throwing in a fire in this, you're going to hell. I don't know.
Well, I think for American culture in particular, it can be overemphasized. It's sort of popular in this past century. It's really been popularized, this book, in a specific way. And so when I was in high school, I read through all the Left Behind series.
Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. When that whole Left Behind came up, I never read the book, never watched the movie. I'm like, I don't care about that garbage. Like, what? I don't even know
Kirk
what that
Cameron
is.
didn't draw you in.
That was way later. I have not seen the movie.
No,
I neither.
they didn't come
I
out
read
at the
the
same
books, didn't see the
time.
movie.
No,
Oh.
no, the
I don't
books.
No, I like to read, and so I was in my early teens whenever those started to come out, and I read all of them really quickly, and they're great books, and that might be somewhat what some of this looks like. Who knows? But that to me was what Revelation was
Yeah.
for a long time. When I read the Left Behind series, that equated to me with this is what it looks like before Jesus comes back.
Same. I remember 16 years old being in Barnes and Noble and trying to just find a book, and like the design of the cover I didn't know what it was, so I picked it up, and I remember they used to have these chairs in Barnes and Noble. I don't know. I don't go there anymore, but you could sit, and so I just
You still can.
Can you? Okay, great. So I remember picking that book off the shelf, and I sat down and I read I started reading, and I'm a few chapters in and realized, oh man, they're closing the store. I'm just going to buy this book, and then I read all of them, and because they're easy to read.
And they're interesting to read because it is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same reason why we can get so wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
It's mysterious. There's all these details of what is happening, and you're given this really cool picture of it in these young adult books.
Yeah, and I think for most of my life, I wasn't a Christ follower, and so it didn't. I had some exposure to books of the Bible and kind of the story, but it wasn't on my radar to even be interested in what it actually said
All right.
Yeah.
or means.
So I just think that when we come to the book of Revelation, this letter to the church, we want to talk through, I think, quickly about what genres they are and then what the context is. But even just maybe if we can all come to it, I was thinking, let's go back to how we began. We don't talk about it probably often enough, but Brad, be still before we read this book, right? There's lots of genres in this book, but the overarching genre of the whole Bible is this meditative literature. We're supposed to sit in this and contemplate this over a long period of time, right? We don't have to cull it for details. Just come to it with a clean slate and let God speak to you through it. Because we all, I think, have a little bit of baggage when it comes to Revelation.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would push on all of us to maybe whatever that baggage is, push it aside, set it aside. The whole be still. What a great practice. But then have in mind what we've been doing all year, reading through the story of, because we started in the New Testament, like Jesus and the church. This is part of that. This isn't outside of that. And it's actually part of the bigger story that began on page 1 with the creation account and God's engagement with humans and all of that. Like, this is all part of that. And so it matters that it's part of that. It's not its own thing. We need to see Revelation in light of where it fits in the redemptive storyline of the Bible.
There's so many parallels to everything we've been reading.
Yep.
I mean, even with his exhortations to the church in this first section, it's like, oh, well, we just read, like, all of these things are the things that churches do, and then he's trying to reorient us, like, but this is who Jesus is, and he's returning, and this is our final hope. So it's really not that different.
Yeah.
Even the specific messages to the message of the whole New Testament, and it is, Jesus is the climax, this is the culmination. It is so hopeful and good. And I think sometimes we read this book and we walk away with fear and we're worried about what's about to happen because when we think of like the apocalypse, we think alien invasion and the end of the world. But oh my gosh, I can't say it. Apocalypse just means revelation.
Yeah.
And that's the unveiling of what's happening. It's the unveiling of the end of the story, which is a good thing. It's a hopeful thing. And so it's encouraging, but it doesn't seem that way.
Yeah.
all
And
the
so
time.
was this the last, like the latest written letter in the Bible? Is there other stuff that was written after this?
This was
know,
written
or
at
is
probably at the very end of the first century. So it is
Yeah.
very late. So we're even after Nero had already,
Yeah.
he's gone. There's been persecution for a long time. And so John is really trying to tell people this is what's happening. This is what's coming. That's why it's hopeful.
Yeah. And so the context is it's long after that. The church is still spread out. They're dispersed.
They're dispersed. It's for the whole church, but it's also, this is written specifically to a small group of churches in a small area,
Yep.
which I think matters.
Yep. So context, I'm thankful you
Yeah.
even use that word. That has to be on the forefront of our minds when we approach Revelation. So what is it? Well, when is it? You already said. What is it? It's a letter. And it was a circular letter. Remember, we've talked about the difference in letters. So it was written to this small group of churches and meant to be passed around. And so
To all the churches,
to
not
those-
just those 7 or just these 7.
it was meant to be passed around to those churches.
Okay.
Primarily. And then obviously it expanded from there. So what I appreciate is, I don't remember who I heard say this, but when we think about the context of this, that it's a letter, the type of letter that it is, where it fits in the redemptive storyline, when it was written, who it was written to, all of that, the meaning of what we read has to be anchored there.
Say that, unpack that one more time, because
Okay.
as we're having this conversation, I'm just thinking like, man, as I read it, I'm thinking like, well, he wrote it to like, it was circulated like, it was for all the churches.
Yes.
If you, I would encourage you to just like even Google, you can Google this, the map of the churches that are
Yeah.
referenced
Oh,
I,
he's
I
got
got
in
one
the
in my
beginning.
little
Oh, you
Bible.
had, there you do
Yeah,
it.
see?
Okay. Okay. Think even if you're thinking through like, let's say modern day news and someone told you something, hey, this is what's happening in this area and this is how we're going to deal with it. And you knew it was in that area of the world. What would you think about that context compared to your context? That
I'm like, you
that is
confuse me.
different.
Yeah,
I'm
oh,
sorry.
that's different. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think for us, it's like easier to think in modern day. Oh, if I know it's in this small space in Turkey, I can understand now
Yeah.
that even though there's these universal truths, so there's a very specific time and context when you even look at the map.
So Jesus specifically wanted to reveal this information through John to these specific churches. No.
Yes.
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 That's what I'm
And
like.
And, there you go, and.
yes, and it was written to them, was written for all of us.
Okay.
So it was written to them in their specific context, and they were being persecuted. They're in this cultural context, but it is for all of us. So there's also the genre of apocalyptic genre, and that's always this is happening right now, but it's also this cosmic good versus evil. This is what's happening at the end of all things. It's both.
Yeah, and apocalyptic, we keep throwing that word around. It's simply descriptive of a prophet's visions and what they've been told by God. So it's meant to interpret. It's interpretive. That's the word I'm looking for. What a prophet has experienced through a vision or a dream,
Yeah.
and again, it's anchored in the present for them. It has to be anchored in their present. That helps us find the meaning and the truth that transcends time and the truth that would be for us.
And this kind of weaves in and out of this apocalyptic. You said there's multiple genres in here. It definitely feels, even in the beginning here, it's like it
It's
starts
different.
like a letter, but
Yep.
then it goes into some other, like this.
Yeah, and I think that that's important to understand because it is a specific genre. It's a real genre that we don't have now. You know, we have an encyclopedia, we have fiction, we know what that means, but this is a genre that we don't deal with now, but was very common at that time. And so there's a way to read it and to understand that there's a lot of imagery involved. So we want there to be this systemic approach to it, and that's not always going to work out. So we have to know there's going to be a lot of imagery and numbers. And when I say that, I don't mean it's not real. we've talked about this before. To say that there's a lot of imagery doesn't mean that it's fiction. It just
Yeah.
means that the Bible is depicting a real truth in a way that can help us understand it.
And I think that's what was challenging, even in these first couple of chapters, is doing that pre-reading there, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna hold this position that maybe all these numbers aren't literal; they're metaphors. They're for something else. So like when you read that, you got to understand this is really. But then maybe there are some things where it's like, no, it is specific to that. Like when we talk 7 churches, I know there's a lot of other 7 stuff later on. It's like, was it really those 7? Yes, it is really those. But this 7 thing, no, it's not really that.
Well,
So,
it's
Yeah.
it's the same thing. But I do think the 7 numbers are really important, just overarchingly to point out whenever we're starting to read this, because it's repeated over and over and over. And we've also
Yeah.
said that when something's repeated over and over and over, and you can see 7 over and over, it means something. And it's a common theme throughout Revelation.
Tell us what it means.
We've talked about it. You've talked
Yeah.
about it a lot. It means completion.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the 7 spirits, the 7 churches, all of those things are to remind you that means completion. So it's the complete fullness of the Spirit of God before the throne. It's the fullness of the church. So think fullness, completeness in your mind anytime you read 7.
Yeah, so it's to those 7, but it's the fullness of the church
It's just
over
the
time.
church.
Yeah.
That's why it's to them,
Yeah.
but it's for
Yeah.
the whole church.
Okay. Man, there's just so much. I feel like we're all on like the preface still.
Which is okay.
But
Yeah.
we need to be.
Yeah. And it's so weird because I think, we don't we don't approach almost any other book, at least that we've been reading in the New Testament, this way. And so it seems strange.
Well, we should approach every book with really trying to think through the context and the history. I think that we know we have to when we get to
Yeah.
Revelation.
Yeah, for me, it speaks to the whole Western culture of there's all this stuff that has to be decoded. And so going in, we got to lay down all these things because we feel like we're about to read something that nobody's really going to be able to get. But yet, over and over, it repeats that phrase of, what is it when he's talking to all the church at the end, like whoever hears this thing, or he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So this idea is no, we should be talk about that, or that it's the revelation of Jesus in verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1. God gave to show these things, and so I don't know. Kind of forget where I'm going on this little rambling quest.
Well, I also think when I was meditating on this week, 1, 4 through 8, I think is for this week. Just this is the theme of all of it. This is how you can sort of understand, just like every other letter, he's telling you the point of all of this. And he goes through, who Jesus is and what he's doing, and that he is going to come back. And so I think if you want to sit in a space, sit right there.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
So maybe that'd be helpful to talk. Just we kind of said it a little bit, but in terms of the biblical theology, the big picture about the big part of the story, what we're about to embark on, how that fits in with everything. I'm saying this because I think you guys have better words to say it than what I would say.
Oh, she's looking at me.
I mean, just where
I was
does it
turning
sit?
to look at Rachel go ahead.
I get that it's
Yeah.
at the end, the culmination, but kind of unpack that a little bit. That in terms of the
Yeah, so you're in the church age, and the church is being persecuted, specifically here, has been. And so when we get to those, the message to each church, you're going to see this theme of endure, have patience, persevere. Because
Be faithful.
Yeah, and be faithful, because it has not been easy for them physically in their life. Just like if they have allegiance to King Jesus, they're paying a price for that. On top of the already challenging situation that was going on in Rome at the time anyway, under Roman rule, not in Rome. But so you have that, the church age, and specifically what's going on there. You have this look to the future, the return of Jesus, when he will come and make all things right. As he said, even when we read in Matthew toward the end in 24, 25, where there will be judgment. The wheat will be separate from the chaff, and all of that. So that pictured the future. This happens in Revelation, and then you get to the end, and we're not gonna spend a lot of time there, but the new heaven and the new earth. That when Jesus came, and the beginning of Mark jumps right into his ministry, he says, the kingdom is here, repent and believe. It's the culmination of that. Like the kingdom that we keep talking about, this upside down kingdom that Jesus brought and we're supposed to be living into, it's the I was going to say the finality, but like the ultimate heaven and earth are one.
And really, I guess where I was hoping we go a little bit is it's like, the story begins with in Eden, God with his people,
Okay, yeah.
all the stuff, and then we get that, and this is describing kind of the culmination. It's not the last 2%.
Yeah, it's the restoration.
Yeah.
The Bible's the story of God redeeming his people and all of creation back to what he always intended in Genesis. And we see not only how hard that is right now and already not yet. We peek behind and see that in heaven, Jesus is on his throne. We see that in these few chapters. But the saints are suffering. There's persecution, and it's hard to be faithful. But by the time we get to the end of Revelation, we're going to see the picture of what our hope is and what is coming. And it's a return to Eden, but even better.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's good job, guys. See, your words are better than mine.
No.
Okay, so this is going to be interesting to go through. I don't know that it's, I mean, I'm wondering how to start off. I guess one thing I wanted to ask or make sure I think may be helpful is like, it jumps from John kind of like talking, but then like I looked in my other Bible because I don't have like the red words in this one. Then like turns to like red words. But what it sounds like, this is, if we look at the beginning here, God gave this revelation to Jesus, and Jesus is speaking through an angel to John. Or is it, like Jesus is speaking to John? I want to make sure I have an understanding of that right. Because then are the red words, they're Jesus' words, but it's an angel that's really doing the talking? Or is it Jesus in
Angel
those
means
things?
messenger. And so I think that's a helpful question because you're going to see that a lot in Revelation.
Okay.
These different, like how that God's word and purposes are revealed. Red words always mean Jesus speaking.
Okay.
It sometimes is through his messengers.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because I'm assuming it's going to weave in and out some. Or is it once he starts talking through this angel to John, I don't know. I didn't look back where it turns more white and then when it turns red again. I mean, obviously, a lot of this is in the letters he's talking to, so it is red words. But
Right. So it is, I think the idea here is really that Jesus is the final word. He's the ultimate revelation of who God is, and he also is the word when he's speaking to, this is what's going to happen because of who I am, and I'm coming back. And so it's all the word of God that we see through Jesus, but whoever is speaking specifically in Revelation, I think will move back and forth.
Yeah.
But it's all revelation from God through Jesus throughout Revelation.
to John.
Yes. For us.
For us.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, in 9 there, this idea of he starts, I, John, a brother, a partner in the tribulation and the kingdom. So we see that, like, I mean, is this to say, like, is this a place where we get people like, we're in the tribulation and the kingdom is already here? I mean, this is affirming those.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
Maybe?
And I think that no matter what your view of how you interpret the events that are described in Revelation, we all know that we are in tribulation. The church has always been persecuted. The creation groans for the return of Christ and redemption of all things. We're there.
So this may be a tribulation, not the tribulation that
I
people
think
hear.
that's
Okay. I don't want. I know this is going to be weird. Like maybe we have to make sure we're accurate or true to our position. So I guess you guys got to make sure we're not.
We don't have a position, and I think that's a really good thing to articulate as a church. There is the position that this is happening. There's a position that this is things that are going to happen as a narrative in the future, and this is open-handed.
Yeah.
So we want to be faithful to the overarching promises and the big picture of what God is doing and has done. But how it looks like specifically, that's okay to be open-handed.
we don't have necessarily a stated position, but we did preach through the book of Revelation from a position.
That's true.
Yeah. So
Everyone's like, wondering, what are they talking about, or which position?
Yeah. Maybe I don't know if that this isn't a helpful conversation for this one, because we'll probably get into that later, like in future podcasts.
We can, yeah.
Okay. Well, keep people wanting to come
There
back
you go.
and
Yeah,
listen
come
to
back
what
to
we're
the
going
next
to
one.
say.
Well, I mean, really, I mean, it's pretty simple
and
though.
then we'll tell
We're
you
not
next week.
how it was taught was from an idealist perspective. That this is this overarching picture of all of God's plan, and it's we don't view this as a literal narrative.
Yeah. And again, I think even going back and listening to some of the podcasts or listening, there was one that Yancey redid that we released later on. Are We in the End Times? Was that one of them? I mean, I think you guys talk about that. So there's other places where if you're really interested,
Yep.
you can go hear other people on our staff speak to that. And Rachel, because I think you were on all of them. You might be the real end times expert here. You got to talk to everybody. And now we're reading through it together with you. This is awesome.
I'm just listening.
Yeah.
We're going to sit on this side
Yeah,
of
we're
the
going to sit on
table.
this side. Yeah. All right. So he gets into these things where there's. I'm just wondering, like, what's helpful to understand
Well, I'll say
about
this,
these letters to the
it's-
churches.
It actually is similar to how we've been studying the Bible all throughout this. There's so many references to the Old Testament. He's referencing all of these pictures in Ezekiel, in Zechariah, in Daniel of what it looks like for the Messiah to come and for the end times, for the day of the Lord. There's so many references to that. And so for them in their culture, they knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, he's talking about this and this and this and this. For us, it sounds weird, but he's trying to
In these
take
letters
them
specifically.
back to, in this letter,
Yeah.
hey, this is the Messiah, and this is the Son of Man who is coming, and this is the day of the Lord.
Well, let's jump into these 7 parts to these 7 churches, these letters to these churches.
Real quick, before we do that,
Okay.
let's just address one of those Old Testament things, the Son of Man, because this is one where it's like the culmination of
Yeah.
this Old Testament theme that Jesus grabbed onto in the Gospels. And now, so in chapter 1, verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of one of the lampstands was one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. So that's important.
It wasn't closed like the Son of Man, who
But yeah,
John had
sorry.
seen, and like John.
Yeah,
wouldn't
like
known
a
that,
Son
so
of
he said
Man.
he's describing like a son.
So that goes all the way back to Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel has a vision that there are these 4 beasts that rise up, and each one is more powerful than the other. And the 4th beast is this superpower. And then the Ancient of Days, which is God himself, is before them, and the beasts are destroyed. And in this vision, there is one like a son of man who rises on the clouds and seats at the right hand of God. And so all throughout Jewish history from that point forward, they looked back on that as a picture of the coming Savior, the one who was able to sit at the right hand of God, to ride on the clouds and equal with God.
They're waiting for one like a Son of Man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
John's saying, it was Jesus, and I'm seeing him
Yeah.
now.
Yep.
And just so that you catch it, in Mark chapter 14, when Jesus is arrested and he stands before the council, the high priest stood up and he's trying to say, like, are you the Messiah? Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Like, direct quote from Daniel 7. And the high priest tore his garments and said, what further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. Kill him.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And now we have, in Revelation, John saying, I saw this Son of Man standing among the lampstands. And that's how he's described. So,
And then he says, and when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though I was dead.
Yeah.
And he laid his hand on me and said, fear not. I'm the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I'm alive forevermore. And I have the keys to death. Right, therefore, what you've seen. I mean, it's such a, it is the culmination of all the promises of the Old Testament right here. It's also, we should come before and go, oh, and we should fall before him and worship. But also he lays his hand on us and says, don't fear, because it's me. It's really comforting and beautiful.
Yeah, you want to find a place to do bread? I would also like just think on that.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
I think the challenging thing is like there's it's so rich. Like I wouldn't even know where to go to begin to know like, oh yeah, that's that. And I know there's like some cross references, and I got a little bit of that in, but I guess you're right. That's where you do have to go get somebody's commentary or somebody who's put in the work and read something that,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think we say this often, but there's not ever a point where you just arrive and you've got the Bible figured out.
yeah,
Never. So it is. You should see yourself as a lifelong student.
yeah,
And when you do, you'll, as you use other resources and sit with the Bible more, this will come to you.
yeah,
But also trust yourself. You've been in the New Testament this whole time.
Yeah.
And it's the same. It's the same references. It's Daniel. It's Isaiah. You're going to see it over and over again. You actually know more than you think you know.
It's true.
yeah. All right, so let's get to these letters that he writes all these churches through 2 and 3. I mean, it sounds like, you know, you can obviously see there's these affirmations, and then there's like warnings
And some correctives.
correctives. I guess maybe not warning. That's more of it.
There's some warning in there, as well as correctives.
Yeah, but I don't know. Do we need
They're
to-
almost like the New Testament letters just condensed.
Yeah. So that's why I didn't have stuff that's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. I think it's things just to remember that like if it's for us as the church, it's the totality of all these things that as the church
We can often be lukewarm.
Yeah.
We can think we're okay because we have a lot of money.
We've forgotten
we
the
can
love
fall
we had
away.
at first.
Yes,
We-
that's right. We all do all of these things. So he is speaking to them specifically about what's going on in their church.
Yeah.
And he's saying, hey, I'm returning. This is all true. Don't forget that this is all a real story and Jesus is returning. So he's trying to call them to their final hope.
Okay, then so I don't want to think we just skipped over stuff, which we probably did. And again, maybe this is a great book. These are great ones. If you have questions, email them.
Quickly.
Yep.
It'd be super fun.
Yep.
Yeah. Just you get them in quick because we're nearing the end.
Yep.
But let's jump to 4, where I don't know, things just seem to. In this one, this is where again we start to see a lot of the description of what he sees, and there's like all these eyes that are like all around and within, and these animals that are like this, and just this is where I'm assuming it's like, okay, these aren't literal things. This is just.
Yeah.
Or it's metaphors for some other thing back in the Old
Calling back.
Testament.
That's right. Yeah.
Almost every single
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah. The Lion of Judah. And then he turns back to see the lion is now what? A lamb.
The lamb. Yeah.
I mean, that one, gosh, we could have a podcast on Jesus as the lamb. What the lamb was in the Old Testament, how Jesus was when John the baptizer sees him walking and says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And then here he is at the end as the lamb who is worthy.
Yeah.
He's the Lion of Judah and the Lamb who is slain with a sword in his mouth. He is worthy to open the scrolls. It's
Well, and so that's what I set up. This is then where it sets up. Then there's this, I guess at the beginning it sets up. So that's the 4 sets the scene of this place. And then 5 starts to get into like, okay, he notices that in the right hand of the one on the throne he's holding this scroll that's sealed up.
Yep.
the scroll is what's going to happen. What's God's purposes
Yeah.
and plan for the world.
Yep.
For the end, for all, what it reveals of all time what it was, or just what's still to come.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't read
We
it.
don't know.
Yes. I mean, he
I didn't know if it alludes to that, and I missed it because it was something.
Yes, who can open the scroll to reveal, right? That's the revelation, to reveal what is coming and how it all happens. Only the one
Yeah.
by whom it happens. Only the king, only the lamb. That's who can open the scroll.
Yeah.
That's how we know who God is. It's how we're redeemed. I mean, he's the only one who's worthy.
Okay, so Let me just make sure I have it right here. Oh, man, I didn't underline it, but I remember reading it where it talks about how it's like and no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And again, it just seems weird the pointing out no one, like that there's these three places that are existing and there's no one in there, but then all of a sudden there is someone there.
Yeah, there's no one anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's all that means.
Yeah.
Under, on, beneath, like
Yeah.
there's nobody, but there is this one who's like the Son of Man. He is the human, he's the lamb who was slain. He's also the one who's like the Son of Man who sits at the right hand of the throne.
Yep.
Only him.
Yeah.
Only him.
Only him.
I mean, maybe one thing we kind of skipped over it. That was is the 24 elders like is that something specific? Is it referencing like you're like
No.
Are they 24 specific people from history that like they get these special seats, or is it just
It is probably the 12 tribes of Israel
Okay.
and the 12 apostles in the new church. So it is this complete picture of the people of God.
okay?
It's all the people of God. They're representatives of the
They're
people of God.
representative of the
The
All-
people of Israel and the church.
Yeah,
which is the people of God.
because
Yeah.
after in Christ's kingdom, it's a new humanity, it's a new Israel, it's a new we're new people.
But we're grafted on.
We're grafted on.
It's one
It's one thing.
cohesive plan.
Yeah.
And we're the people of God.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a great question. I think
Yep.
it's really helpful.
Okay. So I don't know what else do we have in 5. I mean, I know we get there that it's basically pointing to that there is one who is able to open it.
I think it's just worth mentioning, the 7 spirits. There's a lot about the 7 spirits. I mean, it's a very complete picture of who God is. It's the Lamb who's the King, who's the Lion, and there's the Father on his throne, and there's the 7 spirits. That's just a complete picture of who the Spirit is. I mean, it's this very Trinitarian picture of who God is in heaven, which we're seeing this picture of what it is in heaven, and also how we see that in the world. Just Father, Son, and Spirit.
And it's like this, because it says the 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. It's like when God's present, like in the Old Testament with the tabernacle, the flame, the torch. Is that what that's referencing or no?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know, but I think that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, because
no, it's good.
It is, the 7 spirits for God, and anytime God's presence is among His people, it's fire and wind,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that is what you're supposed to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. What?
Nothing.
I just started thinking like modern day torches, like, I don't know, not like old school torches, like
Like,
it's like butane or
Right.
something like
With-
plasma torch, hot, big fire.
All right, how are we going to end this thing, Ted?
I have no idea. I mean, I think what was interesting because I started reading ahead because I'm trying to I don't want to be like, because it's a lot. This jumps around because even in 6 it starts talking about specifically the 7. It's like jumping back to all the seals that were talked about earlier in 5 that it was sealed up. Didn't it say the 7? Yeah, it was sealed with 7 seals. So
there's 7 seals. There's a lot of 7s.
yeah,
And He sort of will move in between
well, that's
the
number.
7,
That's chapter
7.
6, though, where it talks about the 7 seals.
Yeah.
So
We'll
I'm
go
just
through
saying, like,
chapter
it-
six,
We're
right?
in 6.
I thought we only went to 5. Oh crap, you guys! Yeah, I only read to 5, so
Well, we can start
getting
there next
into,
time, but they're all connected.
Yeah.
So it is. I think it can feel chaotic because we're not familiar with the images and the references, but there is an overarching picture of there's persecution. There are the martyrs crying out, but there is one who was slain and who is king, and then
Yeah.
He's going to say, "Here's what's happening."
I'm like, God, how did I miss that? I'm stuck on that for a little bit.
He's like, "You're wrong."
He's
He's
pulling
like,
out
I'm
the
not like you're
bookmark.
wrong. No, it was
What were
it
you about
was
to say?
6. Yeah. Jeez.
I was just going to say, getting into chapter 6, we get into now 3 sets of 7. And there is an approach to that. Again, it kind of how you approach it might be shaped by your approach to Revelation altogether. But some might think that it's a literal timeline or a literal sequence of events. It'd be really hard for that to be true. I more tend to think that it's a different picture of the same set of events over and over. So as we get into the next section, just like have in mind it probably isn't a literal sequence of events. This is illustrative of what God is planning to do. Just like Jesus being a lamb is illustrative of who he is. Think of it that way.
He is the lamb, though. I mean, like,
He is, yes.
I think that is, I think people get fearful when we say it's not literal. We don't mean it's not true.
Right.
I've said it a lot of times,
Correct.
but it is true. These things are happening and they are going to happen, but it's not a code.
Right. It's not a code.
Necessarily.
And Jesus didn't actually walk around as a lamb. He was a human that was fully God.
Yeah. And I think what I'll say is, I would probably say in more recent time for me, I didn't really, I don't want to say give a rip about like what happened in Revelation, because something like that didn't affect my day-to-day life of how I love Jesus, how I love others, and love, my family, love God and love others. And so it's like, something's going to happen. I don't really care. But it's hard to read this and not care, but it's almost like you have to know a position. You have to know what your end times kind of view is to read this well. And not that you have to have it fully understand, but you have to almost pick a framework and then read it that way. And so,
and you at minimum have to live your life in light of it.
Yeah.
Because like the New Testament letters, they say over and over again, it's always, we've talked about this. It's this comfort and warning all throughout the New Testament. And this is the same thing, but with these illustrations, with these images that are supposed to feel extreme so that we feel how true they are, how deep they are. And so it should call us to, okay, this is real. Like, we might not feel like we're being persecuted, but we are in the already not yet. Are we being faithful? Because he is returning. He's knocking at the door. He's, how are we responding to the truth of who Jesus is?
Yeah, and having a conviction about what we view the end times to be and what that says about who Jesus is and what's going to happen and how that impacts our lives, so that ultimately we can be a part of an exponential growth of his kingdom now, how we live today. So, well, for so long, I think I was like, Revelation shouldn't or doesn't influence how I live today. Oh no, I probably should hold some position. Yeah, I should have some view, and it should influence what I believe and what I do today. So, I don't know how else you guys.
Well, I think that if we're going to end somewhere, I would end with, he is worthy. Mm-hmm. There is only one who is worthy. There is one who that all of God's people have been waiting for. That's been promised since the very first pages. And he came. He was real. He died. He was resurrected, and he is reigning. Even though we might not feel like he is, we might not see it. This is a peek to see that he is reigning, and that the new heavens and new earth is coming. He's worthy. So I think worship is the response for this week. Hope and worship.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's Bible reading recap. We hope these conversations are helpful as we all seek Jesus in his word. Listen, if you go to clearcreekresources.org, we have a lot more resources dedicated to helping you study the Bible. Because when we open the Bible, God opens his mouth. Let's continue to seek God in Scripture together. We'll see you next week.